So the first thing we're going to do is lightly sand our tile just to break any gloss. And then we're going to wipe it down with a little alcohol to remove any grease that might be on there, any dirt. And as you can see from the towel, there's always a little bit of something stuck on there. The next thing we're going to use, and I'm just making this up as I go along, you can use whatever products you have. So I have some Set Coat in Royal Taupe. It's a good neutral background. As you can see, I haven't even peeled the top off of it. I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to simply coat my tile. Yes, you could use a bigger brush. This just happened to be what I reached for. Again, I'm truly just kind of doing this with whatever is on hand nearby, so that you get the idea that you can kind of create something wonderful with whatever you happen to have with already. You don't always have to go and buy something. This doesn't have to be a perfect coat because we're going to do layers of other products over it. You just want one smooth, even coat on here, and then you're going to let it dry, probably overnight. Our set coat has now dried. As you can see, it's a little bit streaky, but that's not a problem because that will be used as part of the background. So the next thing I'm going to use is some Artsyville texture medium. Again, it's product I have on hand, product I use on a regular basis. And we're going to skip trowel on some background. Skip troweling means that we apply randomly and leave open spots. I want some of the background to stay visible. There's ways to do that. You can dot it on and smooth it, or I prefer just putting some on my trowel and smearing it around and working it across the surface. Texture medium has a porous texture like marshmallow fluff that makes this a really pretty technique. You want to get it to edges, but you can leave some open spots at the edges as well. The one thing you don't want to do is do all the work in the center and then have nothing on the edges. That doesn't look good. And you can trowel it in all directions. You don't want this to be on here thickly. As you can see, I'm going to leave some of this a little thinner here, some of it a little heavier. But again, the maximum thickness I want on here is about the thickness of a couple dollar bills. Nothing more, because otherwise then it takes forever to dry and you're building up a thickness that doesn't work easily with the next layer. Little troweling marks. You don't want any straight lines in there. You want to make all those methods of application go away. So we already have a beautiful skip trowel. I'm not going to be tinting any of the product that I use. I'll save the tinting for the end when everything is dry. Now we're going to let this dry up. After I take my finger mark out of it, we're going to let this dry up overnight. So we completed this stage with the Artsyville texture medium. It's completely dried. Now we're going to place a stencil on it. This stencil happens to be one of our newer ones called Whitney's Arabesque. Unfortunately, it got really beat up in the move from the old studio to the new one. So it's actually perfect for this because there will be another layer going over here where we bury some of the pattern. I'm just taking some Faux Effects Soft Text. If you're not familiar with the product, this is it. Again, something I had on my shelf. This is a product designed to have a soft finish when dried and mimics fabric. Now you can see my stencils are pulling up everywhere even though I sprayed them because this is my beat up stencil. So I'm going to be dealing with that, you know, after I pull this stencil up and we move it. I do not expect a perfect release on here, but we're going to go for sort of an old world finish on this. So damaged look is all the rage. All right, let's pull this up. Yeah, not great, but that's okay. So you can see this is kind of messy right in here. That wasn't a surprise. I kind of knew that was coming. I'm going to take this over to this side, put it down, hopefully tap down some of the mess that I pulled up before, and we'll see what we make happen. Now, I have this high messy spot here. I'm just going to knock it down a little bit. It gives it sort of an old encrusted look. I'm fine with that, and given what we're doing here with this. And I'm going to come back in with a little more soft text. Now again, if I thought this first laydown was messy because the stencil is so trashed, this one's going to be even. Oh yeah, it's just squidging everywhere. This is not how I normally recommend anybody works with a stencil, but I was about to throw this out and I thought, what the heck? Get at least one use out of it after I cut it. When we cut these for you, we cut them fresh. We put them between pieces of cardboard so that they don't get trashed. And you have to, there's a lot of tiny bridges and stuff that you have to be aware of in here. And that's all fine and dandy. I just didn't take good care of this one because it got caught in the middle of a move. All right, let's pull this one up. And again, you can see some of the stencil pattern is really nice. Some of it's really messy. I'm going to see if I can turn this around a little bit just to get something here in the middle, even though I know I'm laying down stencil on top of wet product, which is not something I normally recommend at all. But since I'm playing with this as an old world mess, I'm just going to make my old world mess even messier. And I'm troweling badly, but I'm just trying not to make a huge mess out of this whole thing. So we're going to pull this up. There we go. So you can see there's a little bit of pattern, and then there's a lot of messiness. We're going to take some of this and knock it down just so we don't have like suck up marks. And then there will be, like I said, another layer over this. And when we're done, you'll see why we're using 3 different products. It'll work. It makes sense. Just keep going with me. All right, our soft text is now dry, and the final layer of plaster to go on here will be Faux Effects Aquastone. And this is a gritty textured plaster that will dry to a porous and slightly gritty consistency and texture when fully cured. And we're just going to skip trowel it a little bit. Again, I am not trying to cover this whole thing. And you can see this, that the white is a little more opaque than it is in the other plasters. It's heavier consistency. Again, I'm not covering the entire surface. I want a little bit of everything to kind of peek through. But we're going to do sort of an old world finish on here, which means layers of crumbly plaster. And then once this is dry, we will work on adding color to this. And it's beautiful in the shades of white as it is, but we're going to do some color adding to it so that you can get a more definite vision of the different products that are on here, because each one will take color differently. And so by applying that on there, you'll see each of the different plasters a little more clearly. So again, I'm going to come back in here, skip trowel over this. And again, skip troweling means I'm not covering it 100%. I'm letting highs and lows happen. And we're going to have a beautiful finish out of this. So make sure to get the edges, because on a small thing like this, it's very easy to work in the middle and not get to the edge. And then it looks a little like you've created a halo. So you don't want to have all your stuff right in the middle. You want to have it all over the place. And definitely all the way to the edge. Okay, so now we've applied that little bit of Aquastone, and we're going to let this dry. All right, so now we are on our coloring step. If you have any high spot that you want to take down, or any rough spots along the edges, take a little sandpaper, take an X-Acto knife. Some of this you can just kind of pop off with your fingers depending on how thick it was at the edge. But you're going to come along here, use the appropriate grit sandpaper for what you're doing. Since I don't have a lot hanging over and I took care of that before it was dry, I just need to take a little sandpaper, take down any extra high spots, knock them down, wipe it off. Very little to work on. Maybe a little right there, because that's where it feels coarsest when I rub my hands over it. And as you can see, there's sort of different colors and layers of white. So pretty as this is, we're going to add a little color in. I'm going to use Faux Effects Asphaltum Transoxide Faux Cream Color. Faux Cream Color has a little bit of acrylic in it. Transoxide means that it's made with natural pigment so that it's exterior rated. And I have a chip brush and I have a water sprayer. So first thing I'm going to do is add water in here. And then I'm going to mist this with a little water. I want this to be a little damp because I don't want this just to suck in. Sorry, I knocked something over. Suck in really hard. Oh, before I forget, I need cheesecloth too. Grabbing my cheesecloth, so because that's going to be needed right away. So I've got very watery asphaltum transoxide, and you can see because the surface was wet, it's just sort of sucking in and bleeding into the different plasters, which was what my goal was. And even now, before I wipe anything back, you can see how differently each of the plasters that were applied take the colorant. And that was the goal. Some of these will take it much darker, and once I start wiping back, you'll see some of it takes it much lighter, and you'll see different exposure. Now, if you don't want it this brown, you can use another color. You can use Van Dyke brown, which is a little more ashy in color. It's a very blue brown, so it's a very cool brown. The goal is to get all of this in here, get all of that white covered with some colorant, and it's still very wet, so I'm going to take a couple of pieces of cheesecloth and then start pouncing it back, and you can see it gets much, much lighter. And this glaze takes, or this watercolor takes into all of this a little differently. It'll pull up these details of where the stencils were, the texture medium that we use from Artsyville in the back, is absorbing differently than the color on the top. The soft text is very porous, so it's taking it in a little darker. And of course, I'm coming back here and I can wipe most of this off of the high points of the aqua stone. So you're going to get a very old world kind of finish here. Now I'm going to go grab my Van Dyke Brown because I meant to bring it with me, but I set it over there. We'll talk about a different color. So this has a little redness to it, and quite frankly, I find it a little too red. I'm not really loving that red. So we got a little Van Dyke Brown here. I'm going to take my chip brush, make sure my chip brush is wet, and I can put a little Van Dyke Brown in here. And see, I can go back in here just with the water, kind of mush it all across here. I can do this wet on wet, or I can wait until it dries and go back in and put in a little more. Either way. I think I like the Van Dyke Brown. I think this was just the asphaltum red, a little too orangey red on here to make me happy. So I'm going to come back in with just the tiniest bit of Van Dyke Brown, work it into the surface. And again, cheesecloth coming back. All I'm doing is deepening the background colors. And you can see that kind of neutralized that a little bit. It's far less orangey than it was before, which makes me happy. Now I can leave it like this. I can put wash of white over here to pop up the top. But what I'm really doing is just sort of wiping off that top layer and giving this really pretty old world effect. Now I have done this kind of finish on walls forever. It's a fantastic wall finish, but it's also great to create something like this. If you've created a finish in somebody's home and you want to give them a little thank you gift, you can use all these products that you had, and I'm just wiping off a little more because I want it a little lighter. You use all the products that you have on hand. Pick up an inexpensive ceramic tile from Home Depot and create a finish that's like what you did for your client on a tile. It'll work and blend into their existing decor, but it'll be super useful. Now, once this is dry, we're going to do a simple epoxy pour over it. You can pour one coat or two, depending on what you need. Once you've done your first pour, we'll see how it levels out. And I may turn this around, take this edge here, because there's still a little bit of chunk of stuff here. Clean that off. So definitely clean your edges off. But once this is dry, this is still too orangey over here for me. I got too much deposit. And you have time to work because now you've dampened the surface, and while this is all still damp, you can pull more off. And even if it's not pulling off evenly, that makes it look even more old world because you're not getting into the crevices, but you can now see little pattern here and here of the embedded stencil, which took the color a little differently. As you can see in the background, here our texture medium took it a little grayer. Our stone, aqua stone on top is a white based product, so it's really easy to lift color off of that, so you have a kind of a brighter surface here, and it gives you a lot of beautiful detail. Okay, we're going to be back as soon as I'm ready to do the epoxy, but this has to be completely dry. You don't want to pour this on, the epoxy on this while it's wet. Now all our plasters and colorants are completely dry. On average, I would say wait a good week with plasters before pouring epoxy, because you want to give a chance for all the moisture to evaporate out. You don't want to trap it under 2-part epoxy. That is not a great thing to have happen. So the next thing now we're going to do is we're going to mix some 2-part epoxy resin. Because this might be used for food, we're using a food safe epoxy, which is our art resin epoxy. However, you can use liquid glass, which is food tolerant. And if you know it's not going to be used for food, you can use any 2-part epoxy resin. I'm going to pour a little bit of the hardener in one container. I think this is the hardener. I'll have to check this. This is the resin. You need equal parts resin and hardener. This is a 1-to-1 mixture with this one. Check your epoxy to make sure yours is the same. But if it is 1-to-1, you must be equal parts. There's no guessing on this. Now, I eyeball things because I'm very good at that. However, if you are not a good eyeballer, don't do it. Get measuring cups that you can throw away. Use red Solo cups that you can just toss when you're done. Let me check my measures. I'm pretty close. The reason you need to be accurate in your measurements is if you've got too much hardener and not enough resin, you can have epoxy that starts to cure too fast, and it can cure brittle. You can even have it starting to harden up as you mix it. If you have too much resin and not enough hardener, you can have epoxy that never cures properly. It can be gooey or soft in spots, sticky. You don't want that. I have done it. I promise you it is not a good thing. So then you take your 2 parts and completely scrape one into the other. There are people who do like to try to do it all in one cup. That doesn't work for me. I like to be able to see my exact measurements in 2 separate containers. I've never been an advocate of, okay, we filled to this line, then we're going to pour the rest in to fill that to the next line, simply because some of these epoxies and hardeners have, the resins and hardeners have different densities, and it makes a huge difference. You can actually make mistakes pouring that way. However, if somebody is showing you successful ways to do that with their resin products, do it that way. I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I like to see everything that I'm doing and see it really well. Now, I've poured these 2 together, and I'm going to start stirring. And as I stir, it's going to start getting cloudy. Once the cloudiness clears, and that's after a minute or so of stirring, you're ready to pour. Now, I'm not one of the people who says, don't stir too fast, you'll get bubbles, don't do this, don't do that, you'll have bad results. I don't care about the bubbles. We have an easy way of removing the bubbles with either a blowtorch or a heat gun. That works just fine. The heat liquefies your epoxy to a point where it's so liquid that the bubbles raise up really easily and pop with the heat. Now, when we talk about blowtorching, I'll show you shortly, you don't blowtorch into the surface. You blowtorch across it. You don't want to stick the torch straight down. You can burn things. So let me finish stirring. Get this all mixed, scrape sides, scrape bottom, scrape everything. And if you have some epoxy bubbles flying around, which is pretty standard once it starts being completely mixed, don't inhale the bubbles. You're inhaling epoxy. You don't want that in your lungs. If you're sensitive to epoxy, put on a respirator. Not just a mask, a respirator. So you want something that takes the fumes out of the air for you. So yes, I know respirators are uncomfortable, but you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Don't be lazy. So we've sanded the sides of this. We've lightly sanded the top. We've done our coloring. Now we're going to pour a little bit of epoxy across the entire surface. And the thing with epoxy is it's self-leveling. So it's going to work its way into those crevices. Now I'm going to come in here with my hand and move this around, because unlike smoother surfaces, this isn't going to move that fast, and I want to get every little bit covered. You can do this in one coat. You can do it in two. Epoxy like this, when it's poured on an open surface, self-levels to about 1/8 of an inch thick. So if you find that you want to build up a little more around the edges, you can tape up around here, build a little bit of a wall around things. That works just fine. But you might have a little bit of an unevenness otherwise. Like mine might drip a little more here. I might have it lower a little here because I've got buildup here where I put the plaster thicker, and here was an open spot. That's okay. However you want to create your edges, that's all up to you. There is nothing wrong with doing it. This may be a 2-coater for me. I haven't decided. I'll know better once it's cured up tomorrow. But all right, so I think I'm covered. Let me check and make sure. I missed some edge right here. I use the light to help me find spots that I miss, because yeah, I miss spots. I'm human. Just because I do it a lot doesn't mean I still don't make a mistake from time to time. So I'm going to make sure. I'm just going to take the last little bits of this epoxy and get it in here. It will probably, that little extra that I just poured will probably run down the side. So in a couple hours, or for the next couple hours, I will come by and do this movement here and catch any epoxy that dribbles down. Now you can also put tape under here to catch that. I've just personally, I hate sticking tape on the bottom of things. Tape is the bane of my life, so I just tend to come by and clean up the edges instead with a gloved finger. This also makes sure my sides are sealed up too, because I want epoxy all down the edges here, and that helps if it's going to drip. It helps if it levels smoothly on the sides too. Okay, so you can see I have covered my glove with epoxy. I'm doing the old-fashioned nurse hook thing. You stick your thumb under, turn the glove up inside out so I don't touch the epoxy fingers. Do that. And then I'm going to take my blowtorch, and actually I'm going to put a fresh glove on for that, because why? Well, I grabbed it with an epoxy glove earlier today and I haven't wiped it off. So I don't really want to have a sticky hand doing this. I know a lot of people take their blowtorches and they put press and seal stuff around it. That would be likely to be something I would set on fire, so I'm not doing that. So I'm going to take my blowtorch and I'm waving it over the surface. I am not taking the torch and going in. I'm not doing any of that. If I have a gap, I'm going to come back with my finger and touch up the gap. This is strictly to pop the bubbles. All right, so thank you for coming with me. Tomorrow this will be hard, but today you get to see this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be glossy. It's going to be beautiful. Let me come in and zoom in on it a little bit so you can see it up close. Whoops, I probably did something bad there. So here you go. You can see how this is just beautiful and shiny. And this is going to make a great gift for, whoops, I'm sorry folks, I'm touching the camera. So this is going to make a great gift for the client whose kitchen you might have done, who you want to do a little something special for the holidays. Take advantage of the fact that you have some leftover product and you can create a special something for them, for their home, for their kitchen, for whatever room that you have completed with the leftover products in the same mode, and get a great result. All right, everyone, thank you so much. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.